The diplomatic vessel Harmony's bridge hung in the void between stars, a neutral ground where species met to forge alliances or prevent wars. Today, it hosted a crisis that threatened to unravel a century of careful negotiations between humanity and the Felker Empire. Captain Mira Vale stood outside the medical bay, her weathered face drawn with concern as she listened to the Felkar ambassador's desperate explanation. Through the reinforced glass, she could see them, 5 royal cubs, their luxurious fur matted and dull, their once bright eyes sunken with hunger. The eldest, Carolyn Highpaw, lay curled protectively around his younger siblings, his amber gaze defiant despite his weakened state. "They refuse everything," Ambassador Thexal rumbled, his massive leonine frame trembling with barely contained anguish. "Protein synthesizers, live prey, processed nutrients from 17 different worlds. They take one bite and turn away. The physicians say another day, perhaps 2, and we will lose them." Mira's jaw tightened. The cubs were the children of Empress Valsara herself, sent on this voyage as a gesture of trust, a promise of future cooperation. Their death would mean war. The Felkar would see it as assassination, regardless of the truth. "Why?" Mira asked simply. "What changed?" "The attack," Thexal said, his clawed hands clenching. "When the pirates boarded 3 days ago, the cubs saw violence. They saw death. Among my people, royal bloodlines carry sensitivities. Trauma can trigger what we call the rejection. Their bodies refuse sustenance they perceive as beneath their station or contaminated by dishonor." "That's suicide," Mira said flatly. "That is instinct," Thexal replied. "An ancient survival mechanism from when our species warred amongst itself. A starving royal would rather die than eat food that might be poisoned by rivals. The conscious mind knows better, but the body will not comply." Mira stared at Carolyn through the glass. The cub was perhaps 12 in human years, but his eyes held an old soul's weight. He met her gaze without flinching, even as his body shivered with weakness. An idea struck her. Ridiculous, almost insulting, but it refused to leave her mind. "Wait here," she said. 10 minutes later, Mira returned carrying a battered canvas bag. She palmed open the medical bay door and walked inside, alone. Thexal made a sound of protest, but she was already moving. Carolyn's ears flattened as she approached. "Another human with another solution," he said, his voice hoarse but steady. "We have explained. We cannot eat. Leave us to die with dignity." "Not offering you a solution," Mira said, sitting cross-legged on the floor within arm's reach. "Offering you lunch." She opened the bag and pulled out a rectangular brown package, tearing it open with practiced efficiency. The smell hit the air immediately. Processed, artificial, vaguely meat-like. "This," Mira said, breaking off a piece of the dense brown bar, "is an MRE, meal, ready to eat, human military combat rations. This particular one is beef stew flavor, though I'll be honest, it tastes more like regret and obligation." Carolyn's nose twitched despite himself. His siblings stirred. "For 300 years," Mira continued, eating a piece herself and grimacing, "human soldiers have eaten these things in the worst places imaginable. In trenches filled with mud and blood, on ships venting atmosphere, in bunkers while enemies shelled us, on planets where everything wanted to kill us." She took another bite. "They taste awful. They're barely food, but every human warrior knows. You eat the MRE, you fight another day." "Why would this matter to us?" Carolyn asked, but his eyes were locked on the package. "Because there's no poison in dishonor," Mira said quietly. "Only in pretending you're too good to survive. Your people are warriors, Carolyn. So are mine. And warriors eat what keeps them alive so they can protect what matters." She held out a piece. Carolyn stared at it, his whole body trembling. Not just from hunger now, but from some internal war Mira couldn't fully understand. "It's not worthy of royalty," he whispered. "Kid." "It's not worthy of anybody," Mira said with a rough laugh. "That's the point. When you're at your lowest, when everything's gone wrong, when you've lost everything you thought made you strong, that's when you find out what you're really made of. You eat the terrible food, you take the help, you survive. That's not weakness. That's the most badass thing you can do." Karolin's paw moved forward slowly. His claws, still sharp despite his condition, carefully took the piece from her hand. He brought it to his mouth. The first bite was small, tentative. He chewed slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he took another bite, and another. His siblings watched, then moved forward, their hunger overcoming their royal conditioning. Mira pulled out more packages, tearing them open, laying out the unappetizing feast. "Tastes like shame," Karolin said after a long moment. "Welcome to the human military experience," Mira replied. "But you're eating. That's what matters." "Why did this work?" Karolin asked, even as he continued to eat, even as color began to return to his fur. "Why could we accept this?" Mira considered her answer carefully. "Maybe because it's honest. There's no pretense here. No one's trying to give you something worthy of your station. This is survivor food, fighter food. It says you're not too good to struggle, and struggling doesn't make you less." Karolin was quiet for a long time, ensuring his siblings ate before taking more himself. A leader even in extremity. Finally, he spoke again. "When we return home, I will tell my mother about this. About humans who feed princes the food of their common soldiers. About warriors who find strength in admitting weakness." "Tell her something else too," Mira said, standing to leave, the bag of MREs left behind. "Tell her that her son refused to die, that when instinct said quit, he chose to live. That's the mark of a real royal. Not the food you eat, but the choice you make when everything's on the line." As Mira left the medical bay, she heard Karolin's voice, stronger now, speaking to his siblings in their own language. Thexal stood waiting, his expression unreadable. "Captain Vale," he said slowly, "what you have done—" "I gave some kids lunch," Mira interrupted. "Let's not make it more complicated than that." But they both knew it was. In the years that followed, when the Felkar Empire and humanity forged their unprecedented alliance, historians would point to treaties and trade agreements. They would speak of military cooperation and shared resources. But Karolin Highpaw, who would one day rule his people, would remember something simpler. The day he learned that true strength meant eating the terrible food, accepting the humble help, and choosing survival over pride. The day he learned what it meant to be human and discovered it wasn't so different from being Felkar after all.